Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Healing America's Narratives podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Always good to be here with you. As I said earlier, I might be clearing my throat a bit. I have some kind of allergy thing going on, but otherwise, I cannot complain.
That's great. So, with that being said, what's your spiritual energy number?
Spiritual energy, as a 10, I choose that. Physical energy is probably more of an 8 because I have to keep doing that. But yeah, I'm showing up with all my cylinders ready to fire.
That's excellent. I join you at a 10. I live in gratitude, and I share my gratitude list that I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life, my challenges and problems. I see as opportunities for my growth, learn wisdom through that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have technology and to be able to literally connect to the whole world from one area. And that's just something to be grateful for and mindful of in today's terms and times. So that's my gratitude list. What about yours?
Yeah, so I'm grateful to have indoor plumbing, electricity. My basic needs are met. I have food in a refrigerator. I have a stove that I can cook on. Plenty of utensils and pots and pans. And even as I said, I have a cough and I'm clearing my throat on a regular basis. I realize that I'm doing that. I have this little irritating cough, but I'm doing it with all my other needs met. So I don't have an irritating cough in Gaza or in Ukraine or in Iran where people are really suffering, and many other places around the planet. I don't mean just to name those three. So I'm just grateful for the foundational, basic benefits that I enjoy just about every day.
All right. What's up? So with that being said, why don't you walk us into our topic for today's show?
Yeah, so something that was foundational, I'm using that word a lot today, to our earliest conversations beginning 3 years ago, when we're talking about the book Healing America's Narratives, the subtitle of which is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. So you and I have spoken a lot about shadow over the years, over these past 3 years, specifically in the context of the collective shadow of the United States. So something we haven't done in depth, which is necessary if we're ever going to recognize, if America is ever going to recognize, own, and integrate its collective shadow, is for individuals to recognize, own, and integrate their own individual shadows, because that's how collective shadow emerges. A country isn't an individual like a person is. It doesn't have a psyche. And the way it gets a shadow, the way it denies things, is if enough of its people deny things. So in America, we have tens of millions of Americans who deny various things. Some are on the left, some are on the right. I don't mean to make those equal necessarily, but nobody, and I'm deliberately going to use a double negative here, nobody doesn't have shadow. I've been doing work, my own personal work on my own shadow for several decades now. And I know enough about it to know that I've uncovered some things that were hidden from consciousness. So now I can work with them, but there is always more. So you never really finish what you uncover. The shadow that each of us has as we do shadow work becomes increasingly more subtle, more nuanced, less like smaller, less like grandiose, but shadow remains. So what we're going to do today, all of that to say, what we're going to do today is take a look at individual shadow and offer a thumbnail sketch of how any one of us can begin to work with it. And I think, I sent you the slides. I think we can do this without the slides. If you want to put them up, you can, but I don't think we really need to do, to have the slides up there. But that's your call if you think they would be helpful. So shadow basically, and this is I just want to define the word as we're using it. We're using it in the sense that Carl Jung used it. So some people use the word shadow to talk about their dark side, the part of themselves they don't like. That's not what we're talking about, because the part of myself that I don't like, by default, by definition, means I know it. So if I don't like it, that means I'm aware of it. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's not yet in consciousness. So shadow is that part of an individual or a group or a nation, organization or a nation, that the individual, the group, or the nation is not aware of. And that if accused of it, would vehemently deny it. So, common examples to make the point is, so a collective shadow would be, we're not violent, they are. An individual shadow might be, if I grew up in a household where anger wasn't allowed, I'm not angry, you are. And shadow can also be positive. You might say, I'm not really courageous, she is, that type of thing. So we're focusing primarily on the negative shadow, those parts of us that are kind of limiting us. But positive shadow is possible too. Jung referred to it, I believe, as golden shadow. So I don't think I'm really that successful. Those people are successful, or I'm not really generous. She's generous. So it's the part of me that I don't own, and I don't own it, and I tend to project it onto others. You can hear in each of those statements, we're not violent, they are. That's the projection. I'm not angry, you are. There's the projection. And I'll say one last thing and then pause so you can comment. Whether or not what I'm denying about myself and projecting onto others is true about the others doesn't matter. Because what I'm concerned with is my own denial, the thing that's repressed inside of me. So if you and I were colleagues and, we were having arguments all the time, which so far we haven't, and I were saying, I'm not angry, you are. If I'm doing my own shadow work, what's most important is my denial of my own anger. You may or may not be angry. In other words, my projection might be true about you, but it's still my projection. Or it might not be true about you. It's still my projection. So just to say that one more time, whether or not the projection is true about the other doesn't matter. What we're concerned with is the thing that we're denying and projecting. So I'll pause there and see where you want to go with this. And tell me if that made any sense.
Yeah, it made sense. And, I look at it several different perspectives, but I want to keep it within this context that I see how the individual shadow, as you described, how that works for the individual, not understanding and not being aware of their shadow selves, as opposed to denying it and being aware. I get that distinction. I think I have a problem with America as a collective shadow, just because I think America is well aware of who they are now. And if they're not, then I would love to understand why not, just from that context of, if you understand any kind of history, just form occupation prior to Trump getting in office. I mean, we've been a military industrial complex for some time now. And now in his administration, we're more emboldened, and we lead with that now, as opposed to try to pretend it's not us and say it's about diplomacy. Now it's just because we can. And that's the thing about Trump, is just letting that be the natural theme of his entire presidency reign, is because we can. That's the difference. And everybody feels that, who is not in alignment with him feels it. That's the other difference. But as it relates to the shadow specifically, but here's my question then. If I'm not aware of my individual shadow, then how can I ever work on it?
By committing, and that's what we'll get into. First, the first thing you need to do is accept that the Jungian version of shadow is a real thing. And it's, if anybody says, well, it's not real, I walk away from that conversation, because there are decades of proof that it's that real. People have worked with shadow, uncovered things, and had better lives because of it, have become increasingly whole based on their shadow work. So the first thing you need to do is hear about shadow and desire to be a more integrated person. Once you do that, then there are some strategies and tactics, some practices you can do to begin to uncover the things that were in your unconscious. So it's a great question. Though, if it's unconscious, how can I work with it? You have to be willing to do the work, and there are various ways. So here's the easiest one, but it tends not to be embraced by people because it's argumentative. Most of the people who know us best are aware of some of our shadow elements. Now, even if they don't know about shadow, they might not be able to say, oh, that's your shadow showing up. But they know about the things that we don't know about ourselves because they see it every day. If they, people who really know us, close colleagues over some years at work, significant other, our kids or our parents. So that's basically it. So it's a great question. How can you work with it if it's unconscious? You need to begin to explore it because you want to be, look at the bottom of the screen here. Because you want to become more fully human. So it's an active choice to begin to work with shadow.
Right. I mean, I can understand that. I guess my question, what I mean by that, is more so in my own life, my intent is to be fully human. And I do things to be fully human. And we're saying my shadow that exists, that I'm unaware of, that's a shadow element that other people may see that I don't see without. So I'm just curious to know, that was something I would want to work on. So it wasn't asking as a flippant question. It was more of, how do you work on something that you don't see?
Yeah.
When you intentionally lead with intent. Now, I do understand how, and I've seen in my own life prior to really working on myself, that I could be triggered, and I can definitely have the attitude that I'm right and they're wrong, and I've definitely had that attitude most of my adult life. I like to believe that I'm working on that now, but you never know until you get triggered. Mm-hmm. And what that trigger is, that shows you that, oh, you still got more work to do. You're not as far down that growth as you thought. But then becoming aware of the fact that you now think about it shows growth as well.
Yeah.
So it's just a really interesting conversation, how just the Carl Jung and the shadow work is appearing so much in my life. I'm going from different conversations with people totally disconnected from our conversation, but shadow comes up in that conversation as well. And it's just the energy I see right now in the universe. I see the shift in the consciousness. And I guess my biggest issues I'm wrestling with, it seems that the framework seems that, not just the Carl Jung framework, but other frameworks seem very rigid and practical, to say that people are kind of locked in once they've been diagnosed or analyzed in this particular model, and there is no way you can grow. There's no way to emerge. And I think I see people evolving and emerging all the time. So that's the wrestle I'm having.
Yeah. So I would, and that makes sense. What I would offer is those of us who work on our own development, in whatever, there's lots of ways to do that. All different disciplines and practices we can, and teachings and models, there's so many of them. One type of shadow for people especially who do spiritual work, and you've probably heard this phrase, is called spiritual bypass. And so, basically what that means is that I want to be a better person. So I start, I'm just going to make up an example. So I start meditating. I read books by spiritual teachers, or I go to workshops, or take, I do a year-long retreat, whatever it is. I start doing things, and I'm sincere about it. So I want to make it clear that we're not talking about somebody who's a snake oil salesman trying to make believe. Somebody who's really sincere. And what we know about spiritual growth, which is different from psychological growth, which is different from intellectual capacity or cognitive growth, we could call that, is that one doesn't deal with the other. So what I can do is I can go and do a 1-year retreat, read all the books, have a real good meditation practice, enter into really, really deep states of meditation, and feel myself being calm and grounded when I'm in the meditation hall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I could do that for decades. I'm going to use an extreme example. But if I haven't taken care of my psychological stuff, if I still have unresolved issues from childhood or adolescence or my first marriage or whatever it happens to be, being a really good meditator and feeling calm is great, but that other stuff is still there. So spiritual bypass means, okay, I'm doing my spiritual work, but I haven't taken care of my concrete day-to-day psychological, physical, intellectual stuff, because they're not the same thing. Ken Wilber is probably he was my primary source to really learn about this, the difference between a temporary state of consciousness, which you can get through spiritual practice, where you have this, really deep meditative state, and stages of development, where you have a permanent stage of development where you really live in the world that way, as opposed to temporarily. So, so that's one thing I would offer, is the conflation that because I'm a spiritual person, everything else is taken care of. And the best examples of that, if you look at some of the early Buddhist teachers, not all of them, who came from Asia. If you look at some of the Western spiritual teachers who developed their own systems and had all these followings, the number of financial, and they were legit teachers, like they could really get you to a different state of consciousness. They weren't making that stuff up. But the number of sexual and financial scandals that they engaged in is legendary, because they were still tempted by money and sex, which is the kind of manifest world problems that we all face, right? The attraction of sexuality and the attraction of money and power. And so they were really good spiritual teachers, but they got busted for all kinds of sexual escapades and financial lack of integrity. So those are good examples, I think, of what we're doing. Did that make sense? And I'm trying not to name names, because I know of real examples. I'm not looking to, I don't speak about people behind their backs, but there are plenty of examples if you just go start searching.
Well, exactly. It makes sense. I hear everything you're saying loud and clear, and I definitely understand spiritual bypassing. And I know that you're not saying this toward me, but I definitely want to make sure I'm clear about who I am and what I'm saying as well. And what I'm saying is this, that if you just do random acts in that thought process of, I'm going to meditate and do all this just to try to get at peace, I get that. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is you commit to saying, even if you believe it as a Christian, I believe that my understanding is that Jesus came as an example to say, follow me. You can do what I do, raise your consciousness and do what I do, so you can transform your consciousness. That's what I'm saying. I believe that's possible. Now, do I believe that just meditating and saying I'm at peace with the world and ignoring the reality of all the chaos around me is the way to go? But what I'm saying is that you can look at how you look at that chaos differently as you evolve. And that's the point I'm making, is It's not being ignorant to the fact that there's things happening. It's just how I see these things happening, and my response, as Viktor Frankl talks about, that uh, gap between stimulus and response. My response now is different because now I know more. I see differently, and so yes, the same things are happening, but they don't trigger me as much anymore. Like I don't get into conversations about race and fighting for black rights and justice as I did just 3 years ago. Those things I would stand on. My identity was my identity, my race was my pride. I associate that with my actual DNA. And I've grown to understand, and I truly believe this, that when you really understand that we really are all energy, everything else is noise. And I don't look at that spiritual bypassing that I realize it is. It's not real. It literally is not the reality. The reality now that I've been able to build around my world is, despite the world being at war and everybody having, I mean, not the world being at war, but the United States being at war, and it makes it feel like the world is at war. It, I'm able to have conversations with everybody that I have meetings with, and everybody's talking about love and building how to co-create, despite that, despite the gas prices being extremely high, and despite the uncertainty of who else we're going to invade as a country and what may actually happen to us. We can think we can live in a glass bubble that nothing's gonna. We can keep on starting these wars and invading things, and we're going to just live in peace with the incompetent people we have in office at these positions is really mind blowing. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen and what it looks like. But despite through all that chaos, I can still find peace to be able to build with people and enjoy the every day of life as well. That's what I mean. So it's not I just saying that you can pay people. Like I really think that it's a lazy way to go to a guru and say, help me cheat and get to a higher level of consciousness without doing the work. And the work is being able to put yourself on at least a 6 month journey of intentionally doing the inner work, whatever that looks like. And I have my process and I'm working on it. I'm not saying that it's the process, but it's definitely helped me. And I see it different in the world. And two people that's following my motto is seeing the exact same thing, where we see that love energy is vibrating around people every day, I believe. And I think that you have to raise your vibrational frequency to attune to those frequencies of blessings that's there all the time, but we just don't see it because we're so caught up in anxiety and depression of living in this world and accepting the reality of it, and then still trying to navigate how do I be spiritual in a world that's telling me that there is no spirituality and I need to be into my own group. That's what the world tells you. Double down on your group, find your tribe, double down on it, take it with pride, and fight everybody else who's different than you. If you were to listen to the media, that's the message that's constantly being fed to you over and over again. You're a victim. This is what's happening only to you because of your race, or because of your religion, or because of the country you live in, or because of your sexual orientation, or because of your gender, or because of the fact that you've done it to people in the past, and now they're saying they're coming back after you. So white man now takes the victim stance. Everybody's passing the victim baton and seeing how things are happening to them only to create that collective unconsciousness of the shadow, in my understanding of it. And that's what they're feeding on. And if you disconnect yourself from that noise, the social media noise, and feed your mind only what you intend to feed your mind, I've seen where it does shift how you think and how you perceive the world. But if I let myself stay plugged into the media, watch TV shows that my algorithm and notifications and streaming services tell me to watch, I'm going to be a person that's drained, engaged, and ready to attack everybody who doesn't look like who I look like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with just about everything you said. I mean, the one thing I would hesitate to agree with is the idea that somebody pays money to a guru as a shortcut. I mean, basically that, I mean, there are lots of people who go study with people who have proven to be great teachers, and the teachers have to make a living as well, and so it's not really a shortcut. It's a lot of work, and in my experience, people who have paid, you know, and guru is a slippery word, because there are some people who are like, really great Buddhist teachers, bringing Buddhism since the late 60s, early 70s to the West, who aren't gurus. They're just ordained Buddhist monks, and they went and studied. It's not really a shortcut. It's a lot of work. It's just that you could spend years trying to figure it out, or get some guidance from a good teacher. It's the reason we have sports coaches or piano teachers. I could sit in front of the keyboards for a decade trying to figure it out, or I'd get a good teacher. So and I know you weren't dismissing anybody who teaches, but it's not really a shortcut. Some people sacrifice a lot to pay to learn, to study. Others just have a lot of money and they just can spend it however they want, and maybe they take it less seriously. I don't know, but otherwise, I agree with much of what you said. So I'm not sure where to go next. Because we haven't really spoken about how to work with shadow. I mean, does it make sense to do that? There are legitimate ways to begin to recognize that I might be denying something, or I might not be aware of something in myself, and other people, might see it. But we don't want to, rely on other people. There are ways I can go about doing my own work, and I don't need, my significant other, or my kid, or my parent, or my boss, or my subordinates at work to tell me. So what would be a next move here? Uh-oh, I think we're frozen. So anybody who's tuned in here, we're obviously having some technical difficulty. King and I have been speaking about shadow. I'm assuming he's going to get back on, and when he gets back on, we'll begin speaking perhaps about some ways to work with shadow. He's back.
Yeah, not sure. I guess that was on my end. Not sure what happened, because my end had a glitch in it. But yeah, I heard what you were saying. You want to shift the conversation. But before you do, I just wanted to make sure I got it understanding that I wasn't talking about any specific group of people. I was really distinguishing myself from myself, to say I'm not a guru. When I'm advocating, I have a particular way of trying to get people to a certain way. So I was really speaking to myself in this space, not any particular teacher or healing practitioner. I get the fuck that people do the work. What I'm saying is that I think it has to be committed to the lifestyle, and that's the difference. You commit to say, this is not something I'm expecting to happen quickly. That this is now going to be a part of my journey. It's a part of who I'm going to be. I'm not going to just do yoga for 2 weeks and expect that I'm going to be in a higher state of consciousness. It's, if I'm going to do yoga for the rest of my life, or any other activity that involves moving energy in the morning, adopting that as a principle and then sticking to that. That's what I mean, making those kind of incremental changes, and to the point where at some point in your life, yoga does come back in as naturally, because you stay with the thought, the intentionality of bringing about a change in your life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, any teacher that I've ever worked with, meaning where I went to study, would completely agree with that. This is not a weekend workshop type thing. This is a commitment to change and development. And yeah, so I think you're spot on with that.
And so now, what I wanted to find out is, how do you really look at identifying shadow as you and others, if you're doing the work as a coach or as a psychiatrist, And then what can ways that people look at how to identify shadow in others as well? Like, what do we see? What are some of the signs that you can see?
Yeah, so I'm going to leave the idea of identifying shadow in someone else over to the side now, because that's, for me, that's the least useful skill, because then shadow becomes a hammer that you use on other people, as opposed to doing your own work. Oh, that's your shadow. That's your shadow. That's your, when I haven't done my own work, that just becomes a cartoon. I mean, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic as I say that, but there's a certain truth to that. So I want to talk about how I'm just going to speak in first person rather than saying how one can do this. So, I might say go into you occasionally, not speaking to you personally, but so a really important place to look is any place that I have, being a good faith practitioner, I feel I have a disproportionate, that's an important word, emotional response to something. It's another way of saying being triggered. But the important part is it's disproportionate. So if something happens, I get angry or resentful or frustrated, pick a word, whatever it happens to be. But I'm able to recognize either in the moment or in hindsight that my response was disproportionate. That's a really good indicator that there might be some unconscious thing working me. So that's the first. Does that make sense? Just the idea of disproportionate. So really important that we're not saying having a strong emotion is bad or shadow. Not saying that. We're saying, after, and if you know yourself reasonably well, you can feel, okay, that what I just did there or said there, that was kind of out of whack considering what just happened and what was really appropriate. So I need to be able to be somewhat self-reflective. All right. So we're looking for this disproportionate response. We get curious around it. And just get curious. What was that really about? So there were two questions that can help drill down into what that disproportionate response was. The first one is the easy one. What is it about that person or that thing or that event or that issue, whatever it was that triggered my disproportionate response? What is it about that person or thing or issue such that I respond to it as I do? Right? Well, they were a bully, or they were dishonest, or they were greedy, or they were whatever, or whatever the thing was. That's why I responded disproportionately, because they were that or it was that. And that, to use the language, that's an external locus. We're putting the responsibility externally. It was because that's like that I responded as I do. And that's not unimportant. All right? Because if we do recognize and we identify something out there that's not good or might be dangerous, that's important. Nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't really give us too much information about ourselves. So the next question is almost the same with one little change. Rather than what is it about that thing or person or issue or event, it's what is it about me such that I respond to that person, thing, event, etc., as I do. So now it's turning inward. And that's not that sounds, I'm going to project onto you for a moment. I'm going to make an assumption about you because I've known you for 3 years and, I kind of know what you're up to. That probably makes a lot of sense and doesn't seem like it's that difficult to do. But for a lot of people, that is a really difficult thing to do. And that's not a criticism, it's an observation. Well, what do you mean, what is it about me? He did this or that that happened, and then blah, 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 whatever it is. And to really get curious about what is it about me such that I respond as I do, that's not a question that, well, let me put it this way. Very few people that I know were taught to reflect that way when they were in their families or in their education. Some were. Some had these great teachers or parents, whatever. Most that I know didn't. So it's an important question, and it's an uncomfortable question and it requires a real commitment. Where there's nothing, I can't find anything about myself that it's because of him. Yeah, I examined my conscience, and it's not my fault. And okay, then you're not going to do the shadow work. Now so I'm going to pause there because that was kind of a lot and see how that landed. There's more, but we'll just leave that there for a second and see what's coming up for you.
Well, what's coming up for me is, number one, I look at a person who cannot see what they brought to the equation that caused it if the person is not aware. And I haven't always been aware to the point where I used to be the person that would always find it was always external. It's always somebody else's fault. But you learn that you can't grow. I can't fix someone else. I can fix, the only person I can fix is me. So I can always point the finger and find, to your point, that they're to blame. But growth only happens, or change can only happen when you say, well, how could I have been done? How could I do it differently? How could I have done it differently? And what lesson did I learn from that? And that's where wisdom to me comes into play. Now you learn that's a valuable lesson. Now, how do I go and move differently as a result of what I just experienced, and what pain and drainage I caused in someone else's life as a result of my actions and my behaviors? Regardless of what else happened that caused the situation, the story that they felt, and that's where I get at the root of, regardless of the intent, the drainage was still felt. And because the drainage was felt, then the apology has to be extended. And then there has to be a way of reconciling that, or at least addressing that and acknowledging the fact that the drainage did happen. And so I definitely believe and concur with that. But I wanted to also explain to folks that I am by no means suggesting that I have it figured out or that I had it figured out. But I can say that I'm a different man than I used to be. Because I used to be a person who definitely could easily find in my tactical thinking mind how someone else contributed to my downfall, and putting the blame there, or blaming some, even talk about Baltimore, COVID, blaming COVID as the reason why what happened to my business happened. What happened to my business was strictly my issues and my lack of experience and not having a mentor. It's a process. And where I was going with when I said about the quick fix, what I believe is that until you've had the crash, until that thunderstorm has hit you, and then you're forced to say, I have to change or else. That's what I was referring to. And that's, to me, that's what happened to me. Mm-hmm. Changing, when you say, I just intend to change, and then you go through a journey, that's a different energy. I'm not saying anything wrong with that. But when you have that point where you hit rock bottom, as people say, within alcohol or drugs or whatever that crisis that is, that thunderstorm you're going through, when you get to the bottom of it, where you have either you change or you die, or it's going to get totally different, and that's the last level that you're going to be sustained, then you become more intentional and open to change, as opposed to just doing it because it intellectually makes sense and you have the discipline and the finances and the ability. It's usually got to come through some form of pain, and that pain puts you centered in that. Someone's passing, combining Baltimore with my mom's passing and the drama associated dealing with that dynamic with the family, and the fact that I had not prepared myself to deal with how her health issues would impact my family, and how we're going to deal with it, and how everybody is dealing with the same problem, but they're experiencing it through totally different perspectives. And that amplifies the intensity of the drama and the emotions of your mother going through health crisis as well. So all that combined is, how do you come back from that? How do you get yourself back in a position and a path where you don't harbor that emotion negatively, but you leverage that as wisdom to grow, to be more empathetic, to want to do love more. And that's the journey I'm on. And that's why I speak from that perspective. And I've been able to manifest by being on that journey now for 118 days with intentionality of it being 6 months has changed my life. Now, is it a permanent change that's going to last forever? I have no idea.
Right.
But I do know that it's not the same life I had prior to it. And that's the reality of the truth I live in. That's the perspective I speak from.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I think you and I have spoken about this. We're sitting, 300 miles, give or take, from each other, using technology to look at each other on two-dimensional screens as three-dimensional human beings, well, multi-dimensional human beings. And I've witnessed your shifting since you've been doing this work. I mean, I agree with you 100%. And I love that you said, I don't know if the change is going to last forever, if it's going to be permanent, and you don't know. Nobody knows. My guess is, but there's a funny comment I'll make, because that one person I learned from said, it's actually an accurate thing. My guess is that you will, but there's one of the benefits of developmental growth, of expanding worldview, of seeing the world through increasingly complex, comprehensive, inclusive, and balanced perspectives, is that when you do hit a bump, like if you were, when we did the developmental stuff last week, and from the highest level we talked about, I'm just going to use colors now. I'm not going to go back into that. From yellow down to green, down to orange, down to blue, down to red. If you're working at orange, which is the modern worldview, when you hit a real bad bump, you go down to blue or red, because that's the only thing that's down there. But if you're operating at yellow or green, and you can kind of catch yourself as you're falling, if you're at yellow, you might just go down to green. So the more work we do, when we do hit bumps and we kind of, lose our momentum, or however you want to say it, one of the goals is to control how far the fall takes us. And that's, I'm laughing as I say it, but it's literally true. The more you understand about yourself, you can say, okay, I've been doing really well, and that just happened, or I just did that, or I allowed that to happen, however you want to phrase it. And you can catch it and not fall all the way down to where you're operating at a might makes right, let me go out and beat on somebody's head perspective, metaphorically speaking. So, yeah, I mean, we don't know. You get up and you get up every day, you do your work, and you do the work, and you do the work, and you do the work. So what I'd like to do is just to add one or two more things to this working with shadow. Because besides disproportionate emotional response as a thing to begin to recognize as a way in, there are a couple of other places we can look. So one is a recurring thought. So if I have a thought, and I'll make it disturbing. If a thought that worries me constantly shows up, I don't mean 1,000 times a day, but kind of on a daily basis or weekly basis, but it's there and it's been there for some months or years. The same way I would get curious about that disproportionate emotional response, I might want to get curious about that recurring thought and ask the same question. What is it about this thought, right, that makes me respond the way I do? That's the easy question. Then the harder question is, what is it about me such that I respond through fear or anxiety or whatever it is when this thought arises? And you begin to really get curious. And there's ways to explore what is it about me. The other one is a dream. If you have a recurring dream, because the dream comes to us from the unconscious. That's what dreams are. That's what they do. And that's the place of shadow. And the unconscious, usually the universe, whatever, might be saying, oh, here's something that might help Reggie and give us this dream, especially if it recurs, but not only if it recurs. What is it about this dream such that I respond to it as I do? And then the turnaround, the important one is, what is it about me such that I respond to this dream and this dream keeps coming back? So you start to dig, because a dream is the unconscious speaking to you. That's what dreams are. I mean, a dream expert might say there's more to that, but I feel comfortable saying that out loud. And I'm not a dream expert. So those are other ways to get into shadow. And the last piece I'll say, and I hesitate to say this last piece because it really requires a written exercise to do it, and I don't want to go too far in, but because we're not going to do a written exercise right now in the last 15 minutes. But taking what's out there, that's like third person, talking about that thing or that person or that issue, and then to begin to talk to it. Again, this is just in my own mind. This would normally be a written exercise. So not actually talking to the real person, and you can't talk to the event really. So to begin to explore it as a you in second person, what is it about you and me and this blah blah blah. So you have a second person conversation, and then you begin to own it in first person. Well, I am that other person. Okay, so you take something that's object, you enter into a relationship with it, you talk to it as a you, and then you bring it into yourself and you own it as part of yourself. That's another way to begin to work with shadow. And what I just said in the last 90 seconds is insufficient to really work well with that, because it's a process that requires repetitive writing to really work with it. But it is another way in. Take what's third person, bring it into second person. That's the same thing we learned about in grade school. Third person is he, she, it, they, them, and other. Second person is you, and first person is me, I, and us. So bringing it from out there in here is another way to work with shadow. But again, it's shadow work. It's not shadow have fun for 5 minutes. It's work. So I'll pause there, and what do you want to do with this?
Well, as you talk, I'm only going to look at it through my lens and how I am the person that has a shadow. Mm-hmm. And within that context, I look at it as I shifted significantly on the identity because of what I've gone through, to the point where, again, my identity was tied to my race, and my identity is tied to being fully human. So much so that I couldn't see, it's not just the old me would have found at the root of everything white supremacy was about white people being in charge and controlling things. And I looked at it from that perspective. That's the old me. That's the shadow work that I had to deal with. Where now I understand that it's not so much about the skin suit of white skin. It's the power structure of the construct that enables the people who are in power, who look that way. But it's deeper than that. And getting to see it within my own race will always create friction when I'm working with people. So if I get brought into new groups of meeting individuals, it's going to come up in me if a person happens to be Indian or Japanese or white male or white female, or she's former Mormon, and I look at them through that lens because I see myself different, and they're other than me, and they're wrong, and their viewpoints have been wrong. So now, as I sit there in that Zoom meeting with them or whatever the platform is, that's all going through my mind while I'm smiling and saying, yeah, great to meet you. And that process of that shadow work is how I look at it. And those thoughts are no longer there. And it's not because it's a racial bypassing and saying, well, we're all one and we're all in love. No, it's truly the fact that race does not exist. It's not just my opinion, a nice thing to say. It truly does not. And believing in that is what creates the energy there. And believing in that is a false narrative I'm painting or writing in my own mind. And so I couldn't be triggered back into thinking that based on some event that happens that's going to force me back to say, is race first? Because I had to go through what I went through to realize that's what taught me real time that race does not exist. Because race existed in the context that people did, I wouldn't have fallen because what the energy I built. But that's a false narrative. It does not exist. Every time someone tries to do things strictly for a race, a particular group of people, it's never going to be sustainable because it's not meant to be. We're all human beings at the end of the day. It's where I'm going with this. And so I'm not going to shift back into thinking race first because I've shifted my consciousness and I understand I've elevated beyond that. That's like going back to third grade thinking when I'm at a college level education. It's like I can't go back to third grade thinking no matter what I do. My brain's has advanced, and it's so that's a part of the shadow work I'm looking at. How does it affect me? Can I still be triggered? I don't believe I can, but it seems like the framework teaches that could always happen because I'm not aware of it. So that's how I process that.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And so the question that I test myself with, and I'm not testing you, but I'm just going to put it out there. So I hesitate to say this because it sounds elitist, but I think it's true, and it's not really meant to be elitist. The majority of people that we come across, the majority of people, and let's just keep it in America, don't do the work that you're doing. Don't do the work that I'm doing on ourselves. A lot of people do, millions do, but it's not anywhere near a majority. Is that a fit? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's for me where the real work is, because I go into a classroom and teach Healing America's Narratives, and you have the book, and you have a good sense of what it is I do. So what is it then, or how then are we called to navigate those moments when we're dealing with a person or a group of people for whom race is very real? I can know it's a construct, you can know it's a construct, but from conception through birth, through childhood, through adulthood, race is very real in their lives, whether they're white, black, pink, doesn't matter. And when they hear something like, if you try to help any race, it's never really going to work because you're missing the part that there is no race. Because, if you had said that to a enslaved person during the Civil War or during Reconstruction or anybody in Jim Crow South, they would, how do you navigate that? Because there still are people who are suffering because of their race, because of the perceptions around race is probably a more accurate way to say it. And that's real in people's lives. And saying, well, it's just a construct isn't a helpful thing to somebody who's suffering, whether the person who's suffering is, I'm just going to use one example, is a black person who is being discriminated against, and that still happens, or it's a white person who's doing the discrimination, who's suffering in ways that they can't imagine because of their bias. How do we navigate those conversations? Because that's where for me, that's where the real work is.
And I'll tell you exactly. The way we navigate those conversations is the construct is not designed to prevent the individual from success. It's designed to prevent the collective from success. So you can look throughout history. How can a former slave like Booker T. Washington go on from being a slave, which is the worst conditions that it can be imaginable among anything we can actually tolerate in our minds today, and actually now leading a university and built it from scratch? It's because if the construct was real, it would have stopped him. Same thing with Frederick Douglass. Same thing with everyone else who rose to greatness. So yes, individuals can do that because they don't see race. They don't operate by race rules. They don't see themselves as a victim. You can't achieve greatness if you see yourself as a victim. And if you believe into the racial construct, then you always see yourself as a victim, whether it's just a racial construct or the ethnicity construct or the sexual orientation construct, any of those things. If you accept that as your identity, not just your description, like black is my description, absolutely. So is man. So is um, all these other roles I live in, but that's not my identity. I don't lead my life through that lens. Now, if the person still chooses to say, well, regardless of what you're saying, I think that's turning my back on my ancestors if I don't make my identity black. And I say that's again the false world that you're creating. It's not. I lift up my ancestors, great, but then my ancestors are not just black individuals. Viktor Frankl is my ancestor. Einstein is my ancestor. So once you open your mind to being fully human, every person who existed is your ancestor. Because again, if we were having a conversation with a Martian, someone who's not from Earth, then you wouldn't be defending your race then. And you look at yourself defending your planet. I'm an Earthling, and you would then identify with every Earthling that exists. So that's what I believe. And for the folks who really can't get beyond that, then I bless and release, because I'm not trying to change you or convince you, and you're not going to convince me to go back into believing how you think, because I believed that way for 53 years of my life, and I know what it got me. It didn't make my life better. I'm not happier as a result. I'm much more happier and better now, and I build with people who are also thinking the same thing I'm thinking, and we don't ignore the fact that our skin suits may be different, but we leverage that as a way of saying, like, you have different foods. I got Italian food, I got Jewish food, I have Chinese food, and they're just flavors of dishes. And you honor the distinction, but you don't have to say, I'm not going to eat all Chinese food. That would be ridiculous. And that's the same thing I think about race. I'm not going to all like all white people because of this. And my final point is this: in my own personal life, I look at every significant milestone in my life. I'm a high school dropout, didn't get past 10th grade. I was supposed to be at the bottom of the barrel, but I've had white people or people in white skin suits who gave me opportunities at key pivotal times in my life that would allow me to grow exponential jumps that no one else had given me an opportunity. So believing that these people are evil because they're a skin suit has always shown not to be a correct message in my life, if I really put it in that context. And I've been able to build some great things with both black, white, or whoever, but because people were human beings, not because they fall under any particular racial category.
Yeah, so I hear all of that. I agree. I agree with that perspective. But if you're dealing with somebody, and I'm just going to go back to the developmental stuff. I'm just going to go to red. The might makes right type thing, and kick your ass, do what has to be done, get it done. That person literally can't hear. Mm-hmm. And what you just said, it's a foreign language. It's like if you never took French lessons and guys, you're talking French to them, or whatever, or it's stuff from the science fiction movies, and it's just sounds of beeps and flashing lights and shit like that. Because those of us who do have a somewhat more expansive, more comprehensive view of the world, in a conversation where there's an unequal worldview, where one is more inclusive, one is less inclusive, it's the responsibility of the person with the more inclusive, comprehensive worldview, if they're going to be in conversation, to meet the other person where he or she is, because the other person can't meet the person with the later developmental worldview. Can't do it because they're not there yet. They haven't developed that much yet. So the ability to from a later worldview, if any one of us really evolved, we transcend and include. So I still have the ability to navigate red inside of me. I know I do. Or blue, the traditional, or orange, the modern worldview, or green, the postmodern worldview. And if I listen carefully, I can hear where somebody's coming from and try to meet them there, because that's the thing it's my responsibility to do. And that's really the work. Otherwise, that's still shadow for me because I'm projecting my worldview onto them and they don't have it. I'm making believe that they can hear what I'm saying. And that's the real work in this development. It's fine. It's great if we're on an equal plane and we can, approximately and can talk to each other. But what do we do when somebody just can't hear? And I agree with what you just said. The skin suits and the racial construct and all that. But I would argue that more than 50% of the people in this country wouldn't agree with that not because they're stupid, is just developmentally. They haven't developed to that point yet. So it's my responsibility to find ways to enter into this kind of conversation where they can begin to hear the possibility. And you don't teach them development. You don't say, well, you're at red and I'm at yellow. You can't do that because that's just, eyeballs roll up in people's heads. But you find a way to speak to red. You find a way to speak to blue, to orange. And each one of them is different. And that's a really hard thing to do. The chart we used last week from my buddy Brett Thomas, it's one thing, when I got that, I said, this is great. To really be able to write to a different worldview or speak to a different worldview is immensely challenging to do. And I believe that's the work that we have to do. So that's less of a response to you personally and more just kind of an overarching view of this, because it's really hard to speak across worldviews. And it really is. It's probably easier if you had an Italian and an American, who one only spoke English, one only spoke Italian, but they're at the same developmental level, they could probably communicate better than two Americans who are at very, very different worldviews. So I'll stop there because I kind of went on a bit of a rant there.
And nothing you said I disagree with at all, other than the fact that you and I have different purposes in our life. Like, I don't believe it's my purpose to convince those people who are in the red or who think differently. I have no intention of trying to change your beliefs, your behaviors, or your agenda. If you and I are aligned, we can build. If we're not, then we're going to move on. Because at this, and I'm just saying that's my own personal perspective. I don't put this on anyone else. But at my life, at 56 years old, looking at the rest of my life, at best I may have 20 years, at best, depending on how well I eat and stay healthy, of the ability to get up, walk, talk, and move on my own. I'm not going to spend that time trying to do the same thing I've done the previous 45 years of convincing and arguing with people who don't think this way. It's like you can choose to be white, black, double down on that, fight it, American, hate the immigrants. That's your energy. That's what gets you fueled up. Great. You're not going to be in my world. You're not going to be in my life. We're not going to be having those conversations. I don't look at myself as a coach or a guide in that context. I want to build with people who are already involved and think at a level of they see no value in being a race or believing in that. Because again, it's not true. So it's not just that we just spiritually bypass it. It's not true. Race does not exist. There is no such thing as race. That's a fact. So it's not just my opinion of that. So if a person just wants to still believe that, then it'll be the exercise of my opinion and futility to try to get them to change that. And to spend my life, the rest of my life, the years I have left in those kind of activities would definitely be a drainage all the time. And even listening to people talk about that on TV now, and folks who push and argue, advocate for the pro-black agenda, and the folks who now on the right who advocate for the white agenda because they want that, and the other folks, Chinese or Asians, are arguing for their agenda, and everybody's positioned themselves to be seen in this social hierarchy. The ones who don't fall victim to that are the ones I do want to build. Those are the ones we can really get some things done and have great, enjoyable lives as we into this last fourth quarter of our lives. So that's just my perspective. And you said you feel you have to change that, and that's the challenge. I commend you. I mean, we need people like you. That's why there's difference in everybody. Everybody has different purpose in life, but I definitely don't believe that my role or is to convince people who are not vibrating with me at this stage. Is that to me is that time's past.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just to clarify, like my agenda isn't to try to change people. I know I can't change people. What I'm able to do, or what I try to do, is either through writing or through teaching or coaching occasionally, is to create a space and to interact with people in such a way that they have a better chance to see the world through increasingly larger perspectives. But I'm a big enough kid to know that I don't, nobody can change somebody else, but I try to create the space for that. And the other thing I have to really, a bone I'll pick with you right now as we bring this to an end. If you're 56 and you only have 20 years left, that means I have basically, 4 years left. So I don't particularly agree with that.
Well, you healthy, and see, like I said, you got more. I'm saying that from somebody at my health level. You're healthy, you eat well, you're active, so you prove the point that you can get longer years, but you got to be more intentional about your health.
As soon as you said that, I said, "Oh man, I'm doomed, man."
No, you're the one that's put me on the right path. So yeah, let's get ready to wrap our show up. I think we've gone over 6 minutes, and so as we close our show, that's any ideals you want to walk us through, or last minute comments, suggestions?
Not just the shadow thing again. Just be on the lookout. If you're interested in finding out some things that you might be projecting out there into the world and denying in yourself, take a look at disproportionate responses that you might have, recurring thoughts that, not that you think about, but just that come, and any dreams that recur, because those might provide you with some fodder for doing some shadow work.
And gratitude for saying that. And Reggie, as we close out our show, I definitely want to say I concur. I always ask Reggie that because he has been instrumental in my growth and development. So it behooves us as listeners to take him up on his advice. And we want to close out our show with giving an example of someone who we believe has been fully human in our lives. And I'll go first just for expediency. And I'm going to say I want to give my love to the Chinese monks who walked from, I believe, the South up to Washington, D.C. And that to me shows what fully human is really all about. When you can see others in suffering and injustice, not make it about your group or your people or anything that benefits you at all, but it benefits humanity, is your attention behind your actions. That to me is the essence of being fully human. And I aspire to be living in that context of their example.
Yeah, great. I agree with that for sure. So somebody I've just recently come across, I want to offer a deep bow to, is a man named Zach, and that's Zach Wahls, Wahls, who's running for the United States Senate in the state of Iowa. And there's making the rounds on social media is a speech that he made when he was 19 years old, in front of, I believe it was in front of the Iowa state legislature. So not the U.S. Senate, but the Iowa state legislature, when they were debating something about same-sex marriage and parenting and all. And he's actually the child of two women, like two women raised him. His parents were two women. And this guy, he's 34 now, again, running for U.S. Senate. And what he said as a 19-year-old in front of the Iowa State's legislature blew me away. It's under 5 minutes. It's up on social media. But just this grounded knowledge of himself, of his parents, of the biases against same-sex marriage and same-sex parents specifically. I mean, a beautifully articulate, I'll say this, young man at the time. He was 19. He's still young. He's 34 now. God help me. He's less than half my age. I'm getting old. But Zach Wall's deep bow to him. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gratitude for that, Reggie, and gratitude for picking today's topic and bringing a great discussion about shadow work to our listening audience, to myself as well. And as we close out our show, we want everybody to continue to be more fully human. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, let's look for ways to do that.
Amen.